Assalamu alaikum. How are you? I'm Imana Sayed, your science teacher. Here is your book, Science 2, and I'm going to present lesson number 1, week 2. Welcome to the unit 3, that is the human transport system. The topics in the discussion are blood, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, plasma, and diseases of the transport system. And the learning objective of today's class is blood and the types of blood cells, and further we will discuss the diseases of the transport system. Before going towards the main contents, let me tell you a short story about the human transport system. Starting from the cell, a cell, whether a single celled, that is called a unicellular, or a large complex organisms such as human body, we all requires food, water, and oxygen for our chemical activities. And we also need waste products to release or to excrete out from the body. And that's the two main important things that every living organisms require. Okay. So in unicellular organisms, which has a large surface area compared to its volume, these substances diffuses through the cell membrane quite easily. But talking about the large complex organisms like humans, certain regions of the body have become adapted for the absorption of one particular substances. For example, air is absorbed through the lungs, and digested food is absorbed through the walls of the small intestine. So the substances are then transported to all parts of the body, and this is the function of the heart and other parts of the blood system. Now let's move towards the main contents of today's lesson. So here is a warm-up activity. Who is going to tell me what is blood made up of? Hmm? Any guess? Any volunteer who want to answer my question? Let's see the answer. Well, your blood is made up of two parts, the liquid part and the solid part. The liquid part is plasma, and the solid part consists of the blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Now, what is blood? Blood is a body fluid in humans and other animals that delivers necessary substances such as nutrients and oxygen to the cells and transport metabolic waste products away from the same cells. In vertebrates, it is composed of blood cells suspended in blood plasma. So basically, blood is a fluid carrying some important nutrients that has been supplied to every part of the body, and each cell has oxygen transferred by the blood. And further, in vertebrates, like in humans, vertebrates means the the organisms that are having the spinal cord. Larger complex organisms have backbones, and they also composed of blood cells suspended in blood plasma. Understand? So the body of an adult contains about 5 liters of blood, and you know that only one drop of your blood contains about 5 million cells. And your blood is a living tissue that is performing many functions. Here are the four main parts of your blood, which includes red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. This is a blood vessel, and here you can see the different types of blood cells present in your blood, and together they include the solid part, which is the white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, and the liquid part of blood is called plasma, which contain water, salt, and other important proteins. These are some of the blood vessels for the deviance, but we will read it in our senior classes. For now, You need to understand that this is a blood vessel, and in the blood vessels, the blood flows quite easily. So, talking about the red blood cells in detail, they are round and biconcave disc like, and they don't have a nucleus. The reason they don't have the nucleus, that's why they have a short life of about 100 days, and in normal days, about 200 million red blood cells dies and replaced every day. And do you know why the red blood cells are red in color? Because the hemoglobin present in the red blood cells, it consists of the heme units. Okay, and the heme units is intense red in color. That's the reason why red blood cells gives us red color. And the function of hemoglobin is to carry oxygen and perform important function. Other name of red blood cells include erythrocytes, and they have two main functions. The first function is to pick up oxygen from the lungs and delivers it to tissues elsewhere. As I have told you earlier that certain regions of the body have been adapted for different functions. So air is absorbed by the lungs and it delivers it to the tissues and elsewhere. So to pick up carbon dioxide from other tissues and unload it in the lungs. Whereas the new red blood cells are made in the bone marrow cells, which fills the center of the larger bones. So bone marrow cells are basically stem cells that has capability of producing new red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and they are very energetic. So like other cells, they also have a cell membrane, but it is elastic in nature. And the elastic nature helps the cells to easily pass through it when they are passing out. So the narrow capillaries, they can easily pass out due to the elastic nature of the blood vessel. And 1 millimeter cube of blood contains about 5 million red blood cells. And talking about in other concentrations, so 1 millimeter cube of blood is equal to 1 milliliter of blood. And 5 million means about 50 lakh red blood cells. So this is a blood vessels, and blood cells are moving out through the blood vessels. Now talking about the white blood cells, which is also known as leukocytes. Leukocytes means white blood cells. And here, can you see a picture? A white blood cells is holding a shield with a sword in his hand, and there are a lot of jumps. So the function of white blood cells is to fight against different diseases. They have a nucleus, and therefore they have a life l- larger than red blood cells, and 1 ml of blood contains about 6,000 white blood cells. The main function of the white blood cells is to defend body against germs, and they are constantly looking for bacteria. But once the white blood cells engulf bacteria, it becomes poison itself, and the yellow pus you can see in your wounds, etc., or infected area, these are basically dead white blood cells. But some white blood cells produce chemicals called antibodies. This here in the picture you can see the Y-shaped body. These are antibodies. So whenever some sort of germs get inside our body, our immune system start producing antibodies against that antigen or against that germ. So these kill germs and change the poisonous chemical produced by germs into harmless substances. So antibodies can stay for a month up to years. So the function of white blood cells is to defend body, to produce antibodies, and to kill germs that change the poison and change their poisonous chemicals into useless substances or harmless substances. Here you can see a blood vessel. The liquid part consists of plasma, whereas the solid part contains white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. So platelets are also very important in our blood system because they are basically a small fragments of bone marrow cells and therefore not really classified as cells themselves. but there are about 250,000 platelets in 1 milliliter of blood, and 1 millimeter is equal to 1 millimeter cube. I have just told you, and each platelet has a sticky membrane and they don't have a nucleus. The important function of platelets is to seal wound by clotting the blood, and the protein that is help out in clotting the blood is called fibrinogen. Thing is when blood goes solid near the wound. Talking about the plasma, which is the liquid part of the blood, contains the red blood cells, white blood cells, etc. So I'm talking about the whole blood, which contains plasma, the liquid part, and the solid part as well. So if you ever visit a blood collection zone, or if you need to withdraw your blood, then you can see this sort of vial. Okay? And this contains the blood plasma. This contains the liquid part and the solid part. The blood plasma is basically the mixture of proteins, enzymes, nutrients, waste, hormones, and gases. And the liquid part is called plasma. Whereas the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets float in it. And what they are doing, they are carrying carbon dioxide from the body back to the lungs. And another waste product called urea from the liver to the kidney. And they contains blood proteins called fibrinogen, which is very important in clotting blood. And if the fibrinogen is absent, it leads to a very harmful disease called hemophilia. Other proteins include the antibodies, which helps to protect against germs. So talking about the diseases of the transport system, first one is anemia. Anemia is basically a condition when there is not enough hemoglobin in our body, and the body is called anemic due to the absence of oxygen carrying proteins, which is called hemoglobin, and it is the oxygen carrying substances in the blood cells. So what happens, due to the lack of hemoglobin, the blood is unable to carry enough oxygen and our body become anemic, and there's not enough red blood cells, and that's why the patient who has anemia, they are treated with the tablets containing the iron salts. Hemophilia is another condition when our body lack fibrinogen or other important proteins that is helpful in the clotting of the blood. Then it leads to hemophilia, which is also a hereditary disease. Means it can easily pass on from the parents to the offspring. And even a small cut of knife or other things can lead hemophilic patient to die. So they need urgent treatments if this ever happens. So okay, class, talking about the thrombosis, which is basically a process of formation of thrombus, which we if call in another words, they are called a clot. All of you are well familiar with the word clot. So thrombosis is the formation of a blood clot known as thrombus within a blood vessel. So if they are formed in the blood vessel of a heart, so they lead to heart failure. And the main reason behind the formation of thrombus is cholesterol level. So whenever there is a high cholesterol level, our arteries become constricted, and due to narrowed blood vessels, the blood will flow with the high pressure. It leads to hypertension or high blood pressure, which in turn are disease which is further linked with many other diseases. So, due to the deposition of cholesterol in our blood arteries, the blood vessels becomes narrowed. And due to these narrow arteries, when blood will flow through the arteries with a high pressure, it makes our heart very weak or stiff to fill and pump efficiently. So the heart become weaker and stop breathing, and this leads to heart failure. Varicose veins, it's a condition when basically a superficial veins that have become enlarged. You can see here a swollen veins and they typically occur just under the skin in the legs, and usually they result in a few symptoms, and but some may experience fullness or pain in this area, in these areas. Okay, and the reason is basically the high cholesterol level, and in bad cases veins may have to be taken out of the leg. So this is the only reason that you need to remove the varicose vein or replace it with the normal one. Leaking of the heart valves, as we have well familiar with the word valve. If we talk about the heart valves or whatever, so valves are basically here to prevent the flow of blood in wrong direction. But what happens when these valves become faulty, the blood start leaking. And the leaking of blood can only be prevented if we replace the faulty valve with a artificial valve. Okay, so this involves the opening up of the heart, and then we put or replace the faulty valve with an artificial one. Faulty pacemaker. So what is a pacemaker? It's basically um, device or a group of cells that we put in the right atrium of the heart with a battery placed under the skin, just right beside the pacemaker, and it produces small pulses of electricity that is about 70 times a minute. And this pulse spread through the heart muscles and making it contract. Understand? So what happens when you can we can also use this pacemaker device when we are doing some other surgeries, that the patients that are having weaker heart, or they need to um, replace or remove the thrombus in the coronary arteries. But a person with a faulty pacemaker can have an artificial pacemaker, and that is fitted with a small battery, as I have just told you earlier, and it is placed under the skin of the chest near the heart. An artificial pacemaker produces pulses of electricity which make the heart beat in a rhythm. So this is a very useful device that's an alternative of the weaker heart. So that's another option. Diabetes is a very common disease. It's a hereditary disease. So what happens that the blood in your glucose level are too high because the hormones, which is insulin, that is storing the glucose into its storage form, which is called glycogen, is not working well. So what happens? A person who is experiencing a diabetes attack, they might become confused, anxious, fatigued, and weak, and they also lead to shock. So that's why the patient or diabetic patients get the insulin dosage due to with the aid of injections or in the form of tablets that can regulate this hormone. And talking about the heart transplant is an operation in which a diseased failing heart is replaced with a healthier donor heart. And heart transplant is a treatment that's actually reserved for people whose condition hasn't improved enough with the medications or other surgeries. So it's a last resort. If nothing is working, then we will go for heart transplant. So in a heart transplant procedure, a surgeon basically removes the diseased heart and sews the donor heart in a place. And then he or she can attaches the major blood vessels to the donor heart. So what happens that anything that is entering in our body from the outside source, our immune system recognize it as a foreign body. So when the heart transplant occur, it is rejected by our immune system. So it's common even in people who take all their medicines as prescribed. So the doctors usually recommend or prescribe some medicines to fight with this condition of rejection by the body. And the transplantation can lengthen the life of someone who would otherwise die. And about 80% of the patients are alive for 2 years after operation, and 72% can survive for 5 years. So here is the assignment. You need to read the page 23 to 27. Don't forget to highlight the important points and learn and write question number 13 to they
18.
all are written here. You can see question number 13, 14, 16, and okay. So here is a wrap-up slide. First of all, we have talked about the blood, which is the uh, living tissue consists of two parts, which is the liquid part and the solid part. And there are different types of blood, which includes red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. And there are different transport system diseases, which includes anemia, hemophilia, varicose vein, leaking of the heart valves, thrombosis, and finally heart failure. I hope you understand the lecture. We also have had enough discussion in our Zoom lectures as well. So I hope it would be really easy and additional if you will listen this voiceover again. Thank you so much, and we will meet soon in our next lecture with a new lesson. Take care. Allah Hafiz.